Francis, Director of Operations for Livonia Public Schools, and
I'm Allison Smith, the Director of Finance.
of course,
I'm Andrea Oquist, Superintendent, so we're pleased to have you here this evening to hear a little bit about our two millage proposals that will be on the ballot August 6th. And behind the camera, we have Mrs. Stacy Jenkins, who is our Administrator of Communications and a very important part of helping share this information with our community. And so I'm going to go ahead and ask our Director of Finance, Mrs. Smith, to get us started.
Perfect. We'll start off with just a little bit leading into why we have these two distinct proposals for our community as we talk about school funding. So a couple key elements. Our first is our operating millage, and the operating millage is something that the state expects us to levy on this local level. Districts receive a per pupil foundation allowance, and the state will back out the revenue that's generated locally through this operating millage. For our district, that generates about $24 million a year, or 17% of our general fund budget. Should this levy not, or this millage not pass, that's something that the state wouldn't make up. So that would be something that we would have to find $24 million worth of expenditures to cut from our budget in order to maintain a balanced budget. So a key proposal, this is renewal, so this isn't something that will be an increase for our community. It's also levied on businesses. This is not levied on your primary residence. So this would be businesses, or if you had a rental property in the school district boundaries, this is what would that would be levied against. A couple takeaways from the funding for school facilities. Back in 1994, when Proposal 8 passed, they at the time didn't actually take the time to figure out what was the cost of educating a child and running a district, and specifically the cost of maintaining our facilities wasn't included in the foundation allowance. So that really left two other mechanisms for generating funds to take care of facilities, and that's through passing the sale of bonds or through a sinking fund levy. We are grateful our community supported a bond back in 2013, but unfortunately we weren't able to meet all of the needs of the district through that 2013 bond, so that's why we also look to a sinking fund. Sinking fund millages are used to keep up our school buildings, facilities, parking lots, roofs, water mains, for example. The legislators just recently, back I believe it was 2016, made some change to the legislation and expanded the use of how the sinking funds could be used. Now, instructional technology as well as security improvements can be paid for out of sinking funds. So that was a big deal for school districts. It still cannot be used for things such as like the general operating expenditures of the district, such as salaries or textbooks, but we do now have this new allowable use for it. Another keynote about sinking funds is, unlike a bond where you sell the bond and you get all the money up front, sinking funds are collected on an annual basis, so we spend it as the money comes in from the community. And the nice thing about the sinking fund is there's no interest costs associated with it, and we're not having to share the money with other communities and stuff like that. So every dollar raised by the community stays here in the community to support our school district. Sure. So we, after much discussion with the school board, elected, instead of doing a straight renewal like we've done for a number of years, to ask the community a replacement sinking fund. If we wanted to take advantage of this new language, the school improvements and security improvements and the technology purchases, we wouldn't be able to just make it a renewal. We would have to levy a new sinking fund. So what we're proposing is letting the existing sinking fund expire at the end of this calendar year, and then levying a new sinking fund starting in tax year 2020 that would allow us to use these funds then for these new expanded purposes. The other key point that we talked about was if we're going to start using it for these additional purposes, does it make sense to levy the same amount that we're currently using or levying and collecting and we're using to maintain our facilities? Or if we're going to start using it for other purposes, does it make sense to ask our community for an increase in the mills? And so we had a lot of discussion on what that type of increase would look like. We wanted to be very cognizant that any kind of increase is an impact on our community. So we didn't want to ask for more than what we thought would be bearable. And so what we came up with was 1.6 mils, which would equate to about a $4 per month increase on the average home here in Livonia, and that works out to about $50 a year. So with that, that would generate an additional $2 million of revenue for our district that we could then start to do some additional planning to incorporate some of these new purposes that we can use the funds for.
And we'll talk momentarily about what type of information and facts that we use to discuss about the need to spend additional dollars, and that's coming up shortly.
And not to forget, one of the points on here that the school district has not asked for an increase since 2005. This is a levy that's been in place since 1995, and that we've kept it at the same level for over a decade.
The sinking fund, some examples, just to give you a little information or just a little back into it, something like this, like I'm a teacher again. So we actually have been doing projects all along. As Allison had mentioned, the sinking fund has been in the district for 25 years, and we have most recently been using them on some pretty big projects, and here's just a few examples of them. Roofs and boilers, the paving projects that you may see as you drive around in the summer at some of the buildings, and the athletic fields. This is a picture of Churchill, but as we speak, currently Stevenson and Franklin are also being worked on. And those are all examples of large planned sinking fund projects. There are items that we also do that may not be planned because it's an emergency type of repair, but that's critical for the sinking fund as well. I think actually this is the piece that
Sure.
you had done.
I'd be happy to, yeah. So when we talk at the, you see at the top of the slide, it talks about addressing ongoing needs, protecting our assets, and being responsible stewards. As we studied this over about a year's period of time and spent a great deal of time first with our administrative team and then with our Board of Education, we wanted to consider each of those three elements. We are responsible for over 3 million square feet of school facilities and over 700 acres that we own across the district that we also maintain. We also are very grateful for the support of our community for the 2013 bond and have completed, as of the end of this summer, a 6-year implementation plan. We feel very strongly that it's important to protect that investment. We've invested almost $200 million into our 23 school facilities and the surrounding properties, and we are so proud of the work that has been done. So protecting that investment that has been made is something that is essential. Mr. Francis talked briefly about the fact that we have a long-term facility plan. In order to come out to our community and ask for these types of proposals and these requests from our community, we couldn't do that without significant study and detailed review. Our long-term facility plan breaks down the needs of each school, the infrastructure needs and the most critical needs, as well as long-term needs that we will have literally in every classroom, in every closet, in every hallway, on every playground, for each one of our facilities. That detailed capital plan is something that the district has utilized for many years. It was updated in 2015, and it's been most recently updated this year in 2019. We continuously update that based on improvements that are made, maintenance that is completed, or renovations that have been done.
And to jump in on that, literally tomorrow morning, we are meeting again to update it again. So it's been 6 months, and we're gonna, first thing tomorrow morning, a few of us are getting together to review.
What that plan has done is allowed us to identify the most critical needs in our district and allowed us to consider the use of the sinking fund for the most needed repairs, replacements, or renovations that we have for each of our facilities.
I'll jump in now. So, over the next 10 years, if we were to have a planned budget through this new sinking fund, one of the ideas and a planning purpose would be to look at our facilities needs. And we've located multiple needs, as Ms. Silquist mentioned, but we're calling these like the big three or the big needs. out of our planned projects, the paving, the roofs, and the boilers are 3 items that our buildings all need addressed. We've just begun doing roofs across the district. That type of planned project, this is our 2nd summer of working on those. So we have a long way to go to get those completed. Boilers, we've only done 1 building thus far on the replacement cycle. Many of these items have, as you well know with your own homes, a useful life. We are at that point where our boilers and our roofs have to be replaced because they are coming to the end of their useful life. They mostly were done in the 90s and some in the early 2000s. With regard to parking lots, we have been doing that for the past several years, and we continue to revamp the parking lots, resurface, and that's a continual item. With as many buildings that we have, once you get through a whole cycle of 23 buildings, you go back to the first one and have to address it again. So at $67 million, that's $6.7 million a year if you just average it out. Now we know it doesn't cost today the same as it will be in 10 years from now, but just taking the simple math and saying $67 million projected cost over 10 years, $6.7 million a year, that alone is more than the current $5 million per year brings in, so you can see where the need would arise. Now, Allison had mentioned earlier that with the change in legislation, where school districts are now allowed to spend dollars from a sinking fund on classroom technology. Well, during the 2013 bond, we filled our classrooms with modern and up-to-date technology, such as not only desktop computers and mobile devices, but sound systems, PA systems, interactive projectors, etc. So while the bond covered putting that into the schools, those have an even shorter lifespan than a roof or a boiler, that's for certain. So we need to have a plan for replacement of these items. If you think back, the bond from 2013, we began purchasing items in 2014. Here we are now in the summer of 2019. Technology-wise, we're already at the point where we need to consider the replacement of some of these items. So we've also got, we also have done a needs assessment or equivalent to the facility assessment in the IT department with regard to the classroom and classroom technology. And what we have projected is approximately $19 million over the next 10 years to put ourselves on a continuous cycle of updating those mobile devices, repairs to PA systems, interactive projector replacements, etc. So over the next 10 years, if we add that 1.9 per year into the 6.7 per year, you can see even with the $7 million per year that is on the ballot, we are having a need greater than what the sinking fund would even bring in. Now, we have other sources that we would use to bridge that gap, but to the point that Allison made earlier, the board reviewed and discussed extensively the idea of how much is an appropriate request. While this isn't enough to cover even these large items that we brought up, the $7 million, the 1.6 mils as a request, was seen as an appropriate ask that was more than we currently have to help fund these critical needs, but not so much that it was just perhaps too much and too large for the community to bear. So this was the appropriate increase that the board decided to ask the community for. And as Allison could go into greater detail, we do have other funds, and that would be coming out of things like the general fund or the capital projects, or even the bond potentially to pick up pieces on some items if there were that in the future. So that is where we're at with some of the background on our facilities needs and the why of an increase.
And one thing to jump in on the technology, you can go to the next one of the pictures.
Yeah,
was just something in that we are very cognizant that we've made instructional shifts in our district and just how dependent we are on technology, that things like the laptops that our students are using, that's not something that we can wait for them to die. We have to be proactive and say, okay, what's a reasonable amount of time to expect to get out of this machine, and then plan for the replacement of that. So we're definitely being very cognizant of that.
And the other item that Allison had mentioned that the legislature made a change to and that we have written into the new ballot proposal is for security. Safety and security is now an allowable expense out of the sinking fund. So we were very fortunate in the district that the community supported the 2013 bond, which through that funding, we were able to put in items such as secure vestibules in the buildings, as cameras on the school buses, cameras interior and exterior of the buildings through IT, and I always take the technology and the security because they really go hand in hand in many areas. Things like servers, etc. Because when you film all those, use those cameras and you keep that film. It's not film anymore. It's not like 100 years old. But when you have all that HD digital footage, you have to store it somewhere, and that is on our servers. So the ability of the sinking fund language to allow us to add or replace security cameras, to make repairs to the secure vestibules, to make repairs to fire alarms, entry alarms, and fire sprinklers in the buildings. All of this becomes another avenue that the sinking fund can support the safety and security of the district. So this, I mentioned before about a life cycle of, or life expectancy on some items. These are a few that we listed because these are items that we spoke to directly as sinking fund projects. And you can see anywhere from 3 to 20 years are up to 25 or even 30 years of a typical lifespan on different items. As we mentioned, roofs and boilers are going to last longer than, say, the parking lots or a laptop. So we want to make sure that we're cognizant of moving through the district in a planned, progressive manner to make these repairs or replacements, whether it be a camera or a roof, and anywhere in between.
So I just want to take a minute on this one. So as you take a look at this, and if a typical useful life of a roof is about 20 to 25 years, and the current average in LPS is just over 20 years. When you take a look at the boilers, it's 25 to 30 years, and our current average is 20 to 25 years. So when you think about the next 10 years ahead and that replacement cycle, the roofing assessments that we've had done on literally every inch of every roof in our district, and we have that laid out in priority order. We know that some of those are closer to being a higher priority than others, but they are all in the priority list. Some are just extremely critical and much higher. And so we really took a look at what is the typical useful life, and then where is the average age within LPS for those either devices, fields, lots, etc. And that was a really helpful model as we took a look at the long-term facility plan and the needs that exist.
It's just an example of the facilities planning assessment that we've been discussing. It is many pages long, and this is simply you can't even read it. You're not meant to be able to necessarily read it. It just shows that we do have down to the nitty-gritty, talking about windows, talking about parking lots, talking about pipes and faucets and fixtures. So it is a very detailed plan.
And we have that detailed facility assessment for each one of our schools.
The roofs, this is always good to see in color. I know that like I mentioned, we're already in the second summer of replacing roofs, and when we've discussed which roofs we're doing with the board, Mrs. Oquist had mentioned that we've had a review and assessment on every roof in the district, and they color-coded maps of every building the company did to show where the condition is of different portions of the roofs. These 3 roofs, as an example, the red is, and it's hard to see down here, but red means very poor. Purple means failing. These are roofs that we still need to do. These are the roofs that are on our buildings right now, which is why we are saying it is important to continually be making these improvements and changes and replacements as needed. So just showing that we are trying to do the due diligence and not just saying, oh, we're just gonna do some work because we've got the money to do it. It's very much, we need the money because we must do this work.
And these are the types of things that, regardless of the additional funding coming in or not, would need to be done. And one of the reasons why we've chosen to ask for that through the sinking fund is so that our dollars are able to remain in the classroom, our general fund dollars, and as opposed to the boiler room. So this is a really key graphic that we wanted to share with you, and Mr. Francis shared the facility's big needs, about $67 million over the next 10 years. Classroom technology needs, about $19 million over the next 7 to 10 years. Safety and security replacement, about $5 million over the next 10 years. And then the emergency repairs, when we have a water main break, that can be anywhere from $200,000 to $400,000 for the replacement of a water main. HVAC systems, electrical, plumbing, those happen throughout the district regularly. And we have an amazing team that take care of our facilities each and every day. But our schools are 40 to 60 years old. So even though many of these things have been renovated, there are areas that continue to need repair and replacement. So we earmark about $500,000 a year, about $300,000 to $500,000 a year for those emergency repairs. For just those needs alone, and again, those all fall within the allowable uses, that would be about $96 million over the next 10 years. We certainly wouldn't do that necessarily in an equal $9.6 million a year, but if you took that out over those 10 years and averaged it to about $9.5 million a year, you get a general idea of covering those needs and what we would need, what kind of revenue would need to come in to match those expenditures. So the sinking fund revenue currently generates about $5 million a year. We're proposing 1.6 mils, which would generate just around $7 million annually. So again, about $70 million over the next 10 years. So you see that the district still must be committed to putting dollars aside for these uses as well as additional needs that exist. And so we've been asked a couple of times, why didn't you just ask for enough, quote unquote, to cover this? And that's certainly something that we considered. Again, there's a reason why we studied this for so many months, and the board took such deliberation to consider the administration's recommendations. We really felt that we would be able to, over that time, utilize some of our general fund dollars and our capital projects fund, where we've been putting money away in a savings account, just like you do when you know you need a new roof at your home, or you need to redo the foundation of your basement. You put aside some dollars continuously, and we're doing a little bit of that each year so that we can supplement the sinking fund. We are grateful for the support the community has given to our district over the past 25 years for the sinking fund. There has not been a request for an increase for the past 14 years. And so we come to you after very careful consideration with what we believe is a more modest increase than could have been requested, because we feel that within our own budgeting we're able to make up that difference. But you can see where the need exists, and we have that well documented through each of our detailed plans. So we mentioned earlier strong financial or fiscal stewardship. And I just want to spend a moment on this, because I think this is an important element for our community to know as we go out to them and ask for their support. Recently, Moody's Investment Agency upgraded Livonia Public Schools from an A3 to an A2 rating based on our strong fiscal practices and increased financial stability. Another outside accreditation agency, Advanced Ed, was recently here for a 4-day visit. They come once every 5 years and do a very thorough review of all aspects of our district. We received full district accreditation, and we were also cited for demonstrating strategic resource management that includes long-range planning and use of resources in support of our district's purpose and direction. So that was identified clearly by the visiting team that came to our district. Finally, our LPS continues to receive the highest rating and the highest level of assurance from our external auditors. We have an auditor that comes each year to do our district's audit of financial statement. The board has also chosen to have a bond audit completed every single year, even though that is not required by law. And that is done by a separate auditing